They called me mad when I testified. A decorated officer with 37 planetary campaigns, reduced to a trembling relic, dismissed from the Imperial Council in disgrace. I still remember their laughter, those polished senators in their ivory halls, sipping synth wine, shaking their heads as if I'd told them a ghost story. But what I saw on that cursed moon wasn't a fable. It was Earth's shadow creeping silently through the stars. And I warned them. Back then, humans were a curiosity. A backwater species newly emerged into the galactic stage, loud and erratic, barely holding their own in the Terran sector. They were granted observer status, nothing more. Their weapons were primitive by our standards, their diplomacy volatile. But I had seen the real face of humanity, long before their diplomats walked the gleaming floors of the Senate Hall. It was on Galactic 4, a low-gravity moon once teeming with insurgents. My unit was deployed for a standard cleansing operation. Simple sweep and burn, remove all resistance, establish order, extract resources. But the resistance wasn't local. It was human. And not a battalion. Just 9 of them. No reinforcements. No fleet. No heavy armor. We lost 58 soldiers in the first rotation. They moved like predators, unpredictable, relentless. They'd disappear into the terrain, re-emerge at night, strike supply lines, disable comms. They didn't aim to win. They aimed to exhaust us. Psychological attrition. Poisoned rations. Dead comrades rigged with traps. One of them laughed while we interrogated him, even with broken limbs. He laughed until he drowned in his own blood. The Senate didn't want to hear that. They said I was traumatized. That I'd mistaken a rogue mercenary squad for a species-wide threat. But I saw their eyes. I saw how humans look when they fight, not for conquest, but for survival. There's something ancient there, something we lost centuries ago. A kind of hunger. Years passed. The humans kept their heads down. Built their stations. Sent ships into unclaimed zones. Always. Peaceful exploration. The Empire didn't care. They were cheap labor, expendable troops in pirate-heavy sectors. The High Council thought they had humans tamed. But the reports kept coming. Outposts where human squads accomplished in weeks what took others months. Insurgencies ending overnight after human deployment. Morale drops in alien units stationed beside them. Something about their presence, their silence. They didn't celebrate victories. They just kept moving. Killing when necessary. Fixing what broke. Then disappearing. I asked again to speak before the council. They ignored the request. So I retired. Not because I was old, but because I knew the storm was coming. You could smell it in the broadcast feeds. You could hear it in the way old generals started speaking of the Terran question. You could feel it in the way systems near Earth went quiet, not conquered, not colonized, just aligned. No one thought to question how humans expanded so rapidly. How they integrated into cultures, adopted languages, learned alien protocols faster than species twice as old. They called it adaptability. I called it rehearsal. Then came the trade rift skirmishes. Empire-backed corporations pushed too close to the Terran border. A misunderstanding, they said. A delay in communication. A few destroyed transport hubs. 4 planets. 1 week. No official retaliation from Earth. No demands. Just silence. The kind of silence you get when something is watching. They still didn't believe me. Until the Echelon massacre. 2,000 Imperial Marines, fortified on a mineral-rich moon, evaporated in under 6 hours. Satellite feeds were corrupted. Black box data unreadable. Only a single message pulsed through subspace. 3 words transmitted in an old Terran dialect. We warned you. By then it was too late. But they still didn't connect the dots. They blamed rebels. Pirates. Malfunctioning AI. Anything but the truth. The truth I had seen years ago, staring down the last of those 9 human operatives as he lit a thermite charge beneath his own feet just to deny us victory. I don't tell this story out of spite. I tell it because there's still time for some of you. Not to win. That's done. The age of the Empire is closing. But maybe if you're lucky to survive, learn their patterns, understand their silence. And above all, when they offer peace, take it. Not because they fear you, but because they've already calculated the cost of crushing you, and decided you're not worth the resources. I once thought of humanity as feral. Now I know better. They are not wild animals. They are refined weapons, tempered by chaos, wielded by something deeper than instinct. Not anger. Not conquest. Just resolve. And that is what makes them unstoppable. The Empire's first mistake was assigning humans to the outer territories. They assumed Earth soldiers were expendable. That assumption would become one of the costliest misjudgments in galactic history. The assignment was simple: support garrison forces in the volatile Dravik fringe, where pirate groups and rogue insurgents disrupted trade. Every other species had failed to stabilize the zone. Humans, they thought, would either bring order or burn out trying. The first human units arrived quietly, no fanfare, no speeches. Within weeks, trade resumed across 3 systems. Pirate activity dropped by 40%. The Empire credited improved logistics. But insiders noticed something different. Human units didn't operate by the manual. They altered patrol patterns, changed communication frequencies, and used their own slang-laced field codes. What others saw as disobedience was in fact calculated optimization. Then came the Crixan Uprising, a separatist movement backed by smugglers and corrupt noble houses. An entire Imperial battalion was dispatched to suppress it, supported by orbital strikes and mechanized cavalry. 72 hours in, the battalion lost communication. A blackout zone spread over the region. Surveillance drones failed to return. Reinforcements were delayed. The Empire expected a drawn-out campaign. Instead, the rebellion collapsed in 5 days. Not from orbital fire, not from negotiation, but from the appearance of a single human recon unit. 32 personnel. No heavy vehicles. No artillery. They inserted silently and dismantled the rebel network node by node, assassinating key leaders, disabling munitions factories, capturing encrypted data, then vanishing before the main forces arrived. When Empire forces re-entered the area, they found disarmed insurgents, bound and blindfolded. Their bunkers were emptied. Ammunition piles sabotaged. Rebel command structures erased. The human squad left only a brief report. No body count. No request for commendation. No explanation of tactics used. They simply returned to their base and resumed standard drills. At first, the brass was impressed. Then concerned. The human unit had bypassed over a dozen Imperial protocols. Chain of command violated. No request for reinforcements. No centralized authorization. But every objective completed. Every loss minimized. And most disturbingly, 0 civilian casualties, despite urban combat. Imperial Command launched an inquiry. But the more they investigated, the less they understood. Human operatives weren't rogue, they were simply efficient. Their squad leaders had been trained in simulations using alien urban architecture. Their linguists had already decoded the rebel dialect months before deployment. Their medics carried tailored antitoxins for regional pathogens, preemptively synthesized based on intercepted medical data. They didn't adapt on the fly. They arrived already adapted. Rumors spread. Human troops weren't standard infantry. They were engineers, hackers, linguists, psychologists, survivalists, all trained to function independently and improvise under failure conditions. They didn't rely on centralized oversight. They relied on mission parameters and trust. That was alien to every other military structure in the galaxy. The Empire thrived on control. Humans thrived on purpose. Then came the evidence no one could deny. A battle report leaked from the classified vaults. The human unit had allowed themselves to be captured. Intentionally. They infiltrated the rebel stronghold by posing as prisoners, disassembled the defenses from within, then triggered a coordinated EMP burst from their subdermal implants, disabling the entire complex. 4 hours later, the rebels were on their knees, begging for surrender. No Empire unit had ever dared such a tactic. And certainly not with such precision. They didn't just win the battle. They rewrote the rules of engagement. Commanders began requesting human advisors. Some did it out of admiration. Others out of fear. The Senate still resisted. They considered it a fluke, an isolated case. Too much autonomy, they said. Too unpredictable. What they couldn't see was that unpredictability wasn't a weakness. It was design. Humans didn't follow templates. They generated new ones. The next test came faster than expected. A coordinated uprising across 3 sectors. Simultaneous attacks on fuel convoys, communication relays, and planetary governors. Chaos unfolded. Imperial units floundered, waiting for orders, requesting backup. In the midst of the collapse, human units acted immediately. They rerouted convoys, secured relays, stabilized public centers, often by ignoring protocol entirely. One general, alien to the core and a staunch Empire loyalist, wrote privately to the Senate. They operate like fire. Dangerous, yes. But if you don't contain them, they clear the rot. But containment was no longer possible. Human strategies spread beyond their own forces. Other species began adopting Terran doctrines. They formed mixed units, started asking for Terran instructors. The humans never imposed. They simply offered results. And with every victory they said less. They didn't crave glory. They didn't seek tribute. They moved from mission to mission like ghosts, leaving behind systems no longer bleeding, planets breathing easier, enemies questioning reality. And in every report, a single pattern emerged: where humans walked, disorder died. Trailer script F to promote this chapter. The Empire had long classified planets by threat level. Earth was designated Category 7, the highest known rating, reserved for volatile environments hostile to most forms of life. The classification came with footnotes, warnings about toxic flora, unstable climates, aggressive fauna. But the Senate, removed from the grid of exploration, treated it as academic trivia. They didn't understand what a death world really meant. Not until they faced its natives in war. Human physiology alone broke standard models. Their tolerance for pain exceeded projections by over 300%. Their immune systems operated with ruthless efficiency, adapting to alien diseases faster than engineered vaccines. Muscular recovery rates defied established norms. Even their psychology was alien. What other species experienced as trauma, humans converted into motivation. They were not stronger in the traditional sense. Their bones broke. Their blood spilled. But they got back up. Again and again. Wounds that would send others into shock only made humans more focused. On the battlefield, they'd tear makeshift bandages from enemy flags, cauterize their own injuries with heated blades, and press forward. Empire scientists launched a covert investigation into these anomalies. Genetic samples collected from volunteer units showed elevated stress hormone thresholds and uniquely complex neural pathways. One researcher described them as walking paradoxes, fragile bodies with indestructible minds. But it wasn't just biology. It was culture. Human history, once considered irrelevant, was now a point of fascination. Wars measured in centuries. Civilizations risen and raised by their own hands. Entire continents burned, rebuilt, and burned again. No other species had endured such cyclical self-destruction and come out stronger. Humanity was shaped by conflict not just physically, but philosophically. They expected struggle. They normalized it. They had a saying, *embrace the suck*. No translation could quite capture its meaning. It was about leaning into pain, accepting discomfort, and pushing through anyway. That mindset permeated every operation. Cold planets, toxic air, resource shortages, humans adapted with startling speed. When others requested retreat, they built forward bases. When rations ran out, they found nutrition in things no biologist would classify as food. When morale broke, they sang. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't insanity. It was ritual. Songs before a charge. Laughter after an ambush. jokes carved into the walls of captured bunkers. Enemy intercepts showed confusion. How could soldiers surrounded, bleeding, and outnumbered, laugh? Because humans saw death differently. Their cultures had rituals for every kind of ending. They mourned, yes, but they also honored. They mythologized sacrifice. A single fallen comrade could ignite an entire campaign. Entire platoons would carry the dog tags of one lost medic or technician into every engagement. Not out of sentiment, but responsibility. During the siege of Jorvuk 9, a critical power node held by rebel forces, Imperial Command ordered a full withdrawal after the fifth failed assault. The terrain was treacherous. Visibility low. Morale depleted. The humans stayed. Not out of defiance. Out of purpose. They didn't just retake the node. They turned the surrounding craters into reinforced trenches overnight. Then used the severed parts of enemy drones to rebuild comms relays. The outpost became a permanent station. Not one of them left until the area was officially declassified 6 months later. Empire analysts were baffled. No single factor explained their success. It wasn't just training. Not just tech. Not even leadership. It was something deeper. A primal refusal to yield. They didn't fight for glory. They fought for each other. Psychological evaluations of captured human soldiers revealed a trend. High stress resistance. Unshakable unit loyalty. And in many cases, no defined fear of death. One interrogator noted, "They treat mortality like a checkpoint, not a wall." When pressed, the humans simply replied, "Everybody dies. Might as well make it count." To the Empire, this was madness. To humans, it was clarity. The turning point came when allied alien units began requesting human mentorship. Not command, mentorship. They wanted to learn the mindset, the rituals, the intent. And humans didn't hold back. They trained others in their way, not by giving orders, but by showing resolve. Across the fringe systems, this new hybrid doctrine emerged, disciplined, mobile, adaptive, and above all, fearless. And at the center of it was always a human, not shouting from the front, but walking silently among the ranks, eyes forward, ready for the next storm. Empires are built on control. But control breaks. Human resilience didn't. That's what made them different. Not their weapons, not their strength. Their refusal to break. Their instinct to endure. Summary, F, for narration highlights. It began with confidence. The Empire believed it could contain humanity with overwhelming force. After all, they had the numbers, the fleets, the infrastructure. Orders were issued, battle groups assembled, sectors assigned. The plan was precise, a synchronized preemptive strike across 7 Terran-aligned systems. The objective wasn't annihilation, it was demonstration. A show of superiority to remind the galaxy who ruled. What they didn't account for was preparation. The humans weren't caught off guard. They had anticipated every move, not because of espionage, but because of experience. Their entire species operated on the expectation of betrayal. As Imperial fleets advanced, human contingency plans activated with terrifying efficiency. Supply depots vanished. Civilian traffic rerouted. Artificial storms triggered. Defensive satellites turned inward and went dark. From the Empire's perspective, it was as if the humans had already evacuated. That illusion lasted hours. When the fleets entered the systems, chaos erupted. Imperial dreadnoughts found themselves surrounded by false beacons and decoy platforms. Navigation AI glitched. Weapons fired on phantom targets. Entire squadrons were lured into asteroid belts where gravity mines detonated in precise sequence. Boarding parties deployed onto seemingly abandoned outposts, only to find themselves sealed in and subjected to atmosphere purges. On the ground, the situation worsened. Human commandos bypassed traditional battlefronts and hit infrastructure, targeting generators, food supplies, comm towers. Empire officers found themselves cut off, blind, and leaderless. The humans didn't hold ground, they shredded it, then disappeared. Their goal wasn't to defend territory. It was to dismantle momentum. In less than 48 hours, 3 entire task forces had lost operational control. Morale shattered. Communications between divisions became erratic. Units hesitated. Rumors spread like wildfire, stories of invisible squads, ships that moved without signals, soldiers who didn't die even after confirmed kills. Panic bred hesitation. Hesitation led to slaughter. A high-ranking commander attempted to stabilize by regrouping forces around the central command station in the Varelian system. It was the most fortified sector in the offensive. Defensive grids, orbital cannons shielded bunkers. The humans never fired a shot. They flooded the station's communication with a single-looped recording, footage of the Empire's own officers panicking as their positions collapsed. Then the entire station's life support shut down. Not from attack. From internal override. The code had been planted weeks earlier, buried in an update sent by a now-missing logistics ship. The few Imperial officers who survived the collapse reported no grand battles. No heroics. Just precision. Calculation. Timing. Human warfare was math, psychology, and theater combined. They didn't just break formations, they broke certainty. In response, the Empire attempted countermeasures, AI overrides, brute force assaults, cyber lockdowns. But every action had already been mirrored. Human hackers rerouted Empire satellites. Their engineers hijacked drone factories. Their analysts broadcast altered star maps to redirect reinforcements into dead zones. It wasn't improvisation. It was a system. One they'd built quietly under the Empire's nose. A captured fleet captain finally admitted the obvious in a decrypted transmission. "We're not at war with humans. We're inside their trap." Even as the Senate tried to spin the failure as minor setbacks, the truth became undeniable. Half of the assigned fleet assets were either disabled or destroyed. Entire supply chains collapsed. Recruitment fell. Citizens questioned everything. For the first time in centuries, the Empire bled in places it thought untouchable. Terran forces never declared victory. They made no demands. They didn't even claim the systems they defended. They simply stopped responding. Like a predator that knew it had made its point. And that was the final blow. Humanity didn't gloat. They didn't broadcast triumph. They left the Empire to fill the silence with its own fear. That silence was louder than any victory speech. It told every senator, every admiral, every observer across the galaxy, you lost because you never understood who you were fighting. The veteran who had warned them was never called back. No apology was issued. But his old reports were quietly removed from public archives. His name, however, began circulating in whispered conversations among junior officers and analysts. Because every war has a beginning. And this one began with a warning they ignored. Narration concept, F, to tie everything together. The Empire tried to negotiate from a position it no longer held. It sent envoys, drafted ceasefire protocols, and offered tribute disguised as reparations. Earth responded with silence, not out of arrogance, but calculation. Humanity didn't need an agreement. They had already dismantled the machinery of imperial dominance. What remained was debris, military, political, and cultural. And they weren't interested in rebuilding it. What came next wasn't conquest. It was transition. Human representatives, not soldiers, appeared at interstellar forums. They didn't demand rulership or territories. They requested reform. One by one, species once bound by fear to the Empire began aligning themselves with Terran-led initiatives. Not because they were coerced, but because humans had shown them something they'd never seen: power wielded with restraint. The veteran, the one who had sounded the alarm years before, was invited, unofficially, to observe the new proceedings. He came not out of loyalty, but curiosity. He found no monuments, no parades. Just rooms filled with unfamiliar voices discussing terms, rebuilding laws, questioning systems that had stood unchallenged for millennia. And at the center of it all, the humans, quiet, direct, unyielding in principle. Not one demanded praise. Not one claimed victory. They treated the collapse of the Empire like a cleanup job. He met a human liaison, young, calm, tired in the eyes. She spoke little, but when she did, every word landed like stone. "We didn't do this for vengeance," she said. "We did it so no one would ever do it to us." The Empire had called Earth primitive. What they hadn't understood was that civilization isn't defined by aesthetics or age. It's defined by clarity of purpose. And humanity's purpose was survival, of their people, their ideals, and their autonomy. When threatened, they didn't escalate emotionally. They calculated the exact level of force necessary to end the threat, and applied it without hesitation. Some systems feared Earth would replace the Empire with a new dominion. But Earth had no interest in bureaucracy. Instead, they offered structure, distributed networks, shared technologies, defense pacts based on mutual interest, not submission. They replaced the concept of empire with alliance. Not everyone trusted it. Many waited for the catch. But none came. Humanity didn't want to rule. They wanted to ensure no one else did. The veteran watched all of this with a kind of quiet awe. The creatures he had once called monsters had become architects of equilibrium. And yet, nothing about their nature had changed. They were still relentless, still impossible to intimidate, still willing to burn down whatever stood in their way if it threatened their future. But now that energy was tempered. Directed. He visited Earth once, at the invitation of a delegation. What he saw confounded him. A world both savage and serene. Towering cities beside untouched forests. Megastructures shadowing fields of wildflowers. Memorials not of conquest, but of endurance, tributes to plague survivors, to those lost in floods, to the anonymous victims of forgotten wars. A culture obsessed not with victory, but remembrance. He stood at a monument inscribed with a single phrase, asterisk. Never again means nothing if you do nothing. Asterisk. It wasn't about war. It was about responsibility. And it explained everything. Humanity didn't rise because they were the strongest. They rose because they refused to let history repeat itself. Every mistake in their past had become a lesson. Every scar, a map. Every victory, a burden. The galaxy would never be the same. Not because of destruction. But because a species once dismissed had rewritten the rules, not with ideology, but with action. Others followed, not out of fear, but because they saw results. Entire civilizations shifted focus from expansion to sustainability. Trade replaced tribute. Collaboration replaced compliance. The Empire's remnants scattered. Some resisted. Some fled. But most simply dissolved, exposed as hollow shells without fear to bind them. And in the vacuum, humanity never stepped forward to fill the throne. They tore it down. The veteran returned to exile, not out of shame, but completion. His warning had not been heeded. But it had proven true. And that truth reshaped everything. He no longer saw humans as a threat. He saw them as a reckoning, a force the galaxy had summoned by its own hubris. He spent his final years watching stars rise over quiet terrain, often wondering what might have happened had the Empire listened. But in the end, he knew the answer didn't matter. They hadn't listened. And humanity had answered exactly as they said they would, not with anger, but with precision. Because humans don't posture. They prepare. Match the story's closing tone.